You know, for the first time in over 40 years, the US government is hitting the reset button on its massive 2,000-page rulebook for spending our taxpayer dollars. They're calling it the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul, and it's a huge deal. But honestly, the way they're doing it, that's the real story here.
So here's what we're going to break down. First, we'll get into what this rulebook actually is and why it needs a total overhaul. Then we'll look at the wild two-phase strategy they're using to make it happen at lightning speed. We'll also dive into the first 31 big changes, and finally, talk about what this all means, both the good and the chaotic.
All right, let's set the stage. To really get why this is a revolution, you first have to understand the problem they're trying to solve. And believe me, it's a big one. We're talking about a seriously tangled web of regulations. So, what exactly is this monster of a rulebook that controls how the federal government spends literally trillions of dollars?
Well, it's called the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the FAR for short, and you can pretty much think of it as the central nervous system for every single government purchase. I mean, if an agency wants to buy anything, from paper clips to fighter jets, the rules for how to do it are buried somewhere in the FAR.
So why the sudden massive push for a revolutionary change? Well, the executive order that kicked this whole thing off did not pull any punches. It basically called the FAR an excessive and overcomplicated mess that created an onerous bureaucracy. Yeah, after 40 years, it seems like everyone agreed the system was just broken.
Okay, so how do you fix a 40-year-old bureaucratic beast? This is where it gets really interesting. The government is using a super unusual strategy, a revolution in 2 phases, and it's all designed to get changes in place, well, now.
This two-phase approach is what makes this whole thing so different. Normally, changing a rule like this would take years of formal processes, but not this time. Phase 1 directs agencies to immediately start using the new rules through something called class deviations. It's only after those changes are already happening that Phase 2 will kick in with the traditional public comment and finalization. It's basically a change now, ask for comments later model.
So what on earth is a class deviation? Think of it like a pre-approved permission slip. It lets agencies legally depart from the official FAR. In this case, it's the special key that unlocks this whole process, allowing the entire government to start using these new, supposedly simpler rules right away, without waiting for the ink to dry.
And when I say fast, I mean fast. The executive order came out in April 2025, and it set this incredibly aggressive 180-day deadline for the first wave of changes. By February 2026, the first major deviations were already live. For government work, that pace is basically light speed. With everything moving this quickly, it really brings us to the most important question. What is actually changing on the ground right now? So let's take a look inside those 31 immediate changes from Phase 1.
So as of early 2026, we're talking about a whopping 31 class deviations being rolled out in this first phase. Let me be clear. This isn't just a tiny tweak here and there. This is a broad, sweeping set of changes hitting a whole bunch of different parts of the procurement process all at once.
And these 31 deviations, they're hitting some of the biggest pain points. For example, the changes to FAR Part 15 are meant to allow for a more normal, modern conversation between the government and contractors instead of the super rigid, formal process they used to have. And then you have Part 34, where they're cutting back on these complex management requirements that were a huge administrative headache. The changes are pretty substantial, covering everything from basic competition rules to really complex cost principles. And if you want to see just how real these changes are, just look at FAR Part 31. That's the section on contract costs. Before, it was famously full of repetitive and confusing jargon. After the overhaul's plain language edits, they cut over 1,300 words. That's a huge difference in making things clearer and more concise. And really, all of these edits are trying to accomplish a few main things. The big goal is to strip out any rule that isn't actually required by law, get rid of old, useless text, and just use plain language to make things clearer for everyone. They're trying to boil the FAR down to its absolute legally required essentials.
So what does this all actually mean in the real world? For our last section, let's talk about the impact of this revolution and, yeah, the uncertainty that comes with it.
Because while the goal is simplicity, the way they're doing it is definitely raising some eyebrows. As the law firm Poliro Mazza pointed out, pushing through massive changes before the public even gets to comment, well, it raises serious questions about government contractor input, regulatory stability, and transparency. Moving this fast is bound to create some turbulence.
So, if you're a contractor, this is a real mix of risk and opportunity. The immediate risk is just confusion. Which set of rules am I even supposed to be following today? But the opportunity is huge. It's a chance to give feedback on new rules while they're basically being beta tested, and that could help shape a much simpler system for years to come.
Ultimately, when you boil it all down, the goal is pretty simple. It's to take the massive bureaucracy and complexity of the old FAR and just shrink it way, way down. This whole thing is a big bet that a smaller, simpler rulebook will lead to a government that just works better.
But that leaves us with the million-dollar question, right? This whole experiment is happening in real time. Is overhauling 40 years of rules on the fly going to create a more agile, efficient government? Or is it just going to create a brand new kind of chaos? Honestly, only time will tell.